Hey, I'm Jack Victor. I'm a professional musician and drum teacher, and I'm making this video today to share the basics of how to get started playing the drums. I'm going to talk about the names of the different drums and cymbals on the drum set and what make each of them special. I'll talk about stick technique and foot technique for the foot pedals. And finally, I'll give you some ideas for how to get started playing a groove on the drums. One way to conceive of the drum set is as a combination of different instruments that can be found in percussion sections, whether that's an orchestra, or a marching drum line, or a samba band, or an Afro-Cuban band. With the drum set, we're distilling this down into a configuration that can be performed by one person. Usually that involves playing several rhythms at the same time to create that complex sound that you would find in a percussion section. Different drummers have different types of drum setups depending on their personal preference and the style of music that they play. But today I'll be showing some of the most common drums and cymbals that can be found on the drum set, and this is what I typically play if I'm working as a drummer. To start things off, let's talk about how to hold the sticks. You want your main grip on the stick to be between your thumb and your pointer finger. Specifically, the second knuckle of your pointer finger is a good place for the stick to sit. Your other fingers are just going to loosely curl around the stick, but not really squeeze. They're just there for support. In general, you want to have a loose grip on the stick so that the stick can bounce and rebound when you hit each of the drums. You almost want to imagine that the tip of the stick is a tiny basketball that you're dribbling. When you hit the drum, you want it to bounce right back up and rebound. You want to use the wrists to create these strokes, not the arms. In general, you want to minimize your arm movement and let the wrists do all the work. One common mistake that I see with beginning drum students is the pointer finger coming on top of the stick. This doesn't allow the stick to properly rebound. So if you notice that this is happening, just bring that back around to the side and grip the stick with your pointer finger. Now that we've talked about stick technique, let's talk about the different drums that are commonly found on the drum set. This is a snare drum. What makes the snare drum special are these spring-like things on the bottom of the drum that vibrate when the drum is hit. There's a lever on the side of the snare drum that can be used when it's flipped up to play with the snares on, and when it's flipped down to play with the snares off. Typically, in rock and pop music, the snare drum is played on the backbeat, which means beats 2 and 4 in the measure. Next, let's talk about the kick drum, which is also sometimes called a bass drum. This is the lowest pitched instrument on the drum set, and it's played with the foot using a foot pedal. There are two different techniques that people use to play the foot pedal. One is with the heel down. This is more common for jazz. And the other is with the heel up. This is more common for rock. Either way, the important thing is to keep contact with your foot on the pedal. You never want your foot to come all the way off in between using the kick drum. Now let's talk about the toms. My drum set has two toms, a rack tom, which is mounted up on a rack, and a floor tom, which is standing on the floor. Oftentimes, toms are used to create drum fills. But they can also be used to create a groove. Okay, that covers all of the drums that are most commonly found on the drum set. So now let's get into the cymbals. The largest cymbal on the drum set is the ride cymbal. This typically plays a very consistent rhythm, so I think of it as the beat guide or the timekeeper for everything else that's happening in a drum groove. You can either play on the face of the cymbal or the bell of the cymbal, depending on what kind of sound you're trying to get. Now let's move over to the hi-hat. This is a very versatile instrument on the drum set because we can play with the hi-hat closed, or open, or partially open, or with the foot pedal. Similarly to the ride cymbal, oftentimes the hi-hat is playing a very consistent rhythm and can be used as a beat guide for your groove, but it can also be used for variations in texture. Alright, now it's time for the fun part. I'm going to teach you how to play a groove on the drum set. If you don't know what a groove is, it's basically a repeated rhythm with enough consistency that a listener could latch onto it or even move their body to it potentially. What we're going to learn today is a three-part groove that involves the ride cymbal, the snare drum, and the kick drum. Start off by playing a consistent rhythm on the ride cymbal. Tap your stick and count 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and out loud as you tap. I know it can feel silly to count out loud while you're practicing, but this is an important part of the process and many people find it helpful.
1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2.
Once it feels pretty easy to play the ride cymbal and count out loud, we're going to try to add in the snare drum on beat 2. What I want you to focus on is as you count out loud, every time you say the number 2, play with 2 sticks.
1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2.
Practice just the ride cymbal and the snare while counting out loud until all of that feels pretty easy to play. The final piece of this groove is the kick drum, which we'll add on beat 1. This is where it gets very difficult to coordinate. Much like with juggling, the third element is the one that makes it complex, but also interesting. Take it slow and don't forget to count out loud. This is one of the most common drum grooves in rock and pop music, and it's easy to make variations on it by moving the right stick to different instruments on the drum set. But no matter what you do with the right stick, your left stick will stay on the snare, playing on beat 2. One quick note here. So far I've been explaining this from the perspective of a right-handed drummer, which most people are, but there are also lots of left-handed drummers out there. Oftentimes left-handed drummers reverse the roles of the hands, so the left stick is the one that does the 1 and 2 and tap on the cymbal, and the right stick is the one that plays on the snare on beat 2. If you're left-handed, Give that a try and see if it feels more natural. Once you are confident playing this pattern on your own, I recommend trying it with some songs. Here are a few examples that have a very similar groove to the one we just learned.